All right. Well, my friends, it looks like we are live. How is everyone today? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and it's truly wonderful to be here in 2020 doing a new show on Behance. And it is the video masterclass. And today we're going to focus on intro to color grading inside of Premiere Pro. As always, we've got our live interactive chat. And this show, unlike my regular daily live streams, is actually going to be sort of live and in real time. So I'm watching your chat in front of me here. If you're asking questions as I'm going, I will try to answer them. We've also got some Adobe peeps and, of course, some of our regulars like Tim modding in the chat there, and they can help you out as well. So I've got a lot of stuff to cover. This is the first episode. I really want to make sure I get it all into those 57 minutes for you. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm just going to switch over to my screen here. And everything seems to be working well, so that's good. Okay, let's move over. And bzz, there we go. All right, and just a couple of quick shouts. What's up, Cecilia, Michelle, Tim, how you doing? Mayanne, Eric, Jesse, Jan, Eric, always great to see you. Mel, Paco, what is up, man? All's going well so far. All right. Aurelia, okay, awesome. Wonderful audience. Okay. So what I want to do today is really focus on just the basics of understanding how to begin the process of grading and using sort of color in Premiere Pro. And we're really going to cover fundamentals here. So if you've never done it before, the first thing you'll want to do when you open up your footage, when you've got your content in Premiere, is switch over to the color workspace. And you can access that by going up to the window menu up at the top here and choosing color. Now, I, of course, am using a custom one here just to kind of fit all of my panels inside the stream. But what that's going to do is it's going to open up the Lumetri Color Panel for you. And this is where we're going to focus on sort of the grading aspects or the color aspects working in Premiere Pro. Now, the cool thing about this is that this functions very much like the Develop module in Lightroom. And specifically, there's several different modules inside of Lumetri. So up at the top here, if we take a look, you've got Basic Correction, Creative, Curves, Color Wheels and Match, HSL Secondary, and Vignette. Now for today's episode, for the first episode, we're really just going to focus on these first three. And I assure you there's enough to cover there. You'll be saturated and satiated with a lot of good info here. Now, again, talking about how this relates to Lightroom, well, if you take a look at the elements that you have inside of Basic Correction, like temperature, tint, and then the tone controls, exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, and saturation, if I bounce over here, I happen to open up my Lightroom CC. Similar, we're going to have the same kind of Develop module controls along the right side here. Under Light, you'll see those same exact controls: exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, and then under Color, we have temp, tint, vibrance, and saturation. Okay, so if you already sort of understand the concept of doing this in Lightroom, or in Camera Raw for that matter, it's going to be that much easier for you to leverage this inside of Premiere. All right. Now, let's just take a quick look at the footage that we've got here. So this is the combination of some of the stuff that I've shot, some stuff that we've used in various demos before. This shot that you're seeing here is from a film called The Seam Between. And if you take a look at this footage, I'll play a little bit of this back. This is already graded. So this looks really lovely, beautiful, vibrant color. Skin tone is popping, sky is popping. The greens of the sky are the greens of the sky, the blues of the sky, the green of the grass. Everything is really vibrant and lovely. But it didn't start out that way, right? And one of the first things that I'm going to recommend that you add to your buttons, to your controls inside of your program monitor, which is where we're seeing the output that when we make our adjustments and our changes, is this Global Effects Mute button. Now, this is not enabled by default. To add that to your buttons, you're going to go to the button editor, which is this little plus button here, all right? Click on that plus button, and this shows you all of the available buttons that you have to you. You're going to take the Global Effects Mute, and you're just going to drag it down into the panel down there. It's simple drag and drop, and it will add it. So if I mute all of the effects, this is where we started. And this is not uncommon. Now, for all of you photographers out there, and for anyone who's shot like DSLR video, this is very familiar to you, right? So it's not unlike the way that we do it in photography when, you know, you're shooting raw because you want to take advantage of all the dynamic range that you have. And of course, all of your color, tone, and lighting settings can be edited after the fact. Well, it's the same thing in video here. And in the case of this particular footage, which I believe was shot on a flavor of Sony A7, we shoot everything what's known as super flat, which enables us to add all that color back in and gives us more latitude when actually performing the grade or the color correction. All right, just checking at our chats here. All right, very, very cool. So that's sort of the before. This is the after. How do we get there? Okay, well, there's a couple steps, and this is where we're going to start now diving into elements of Lumetri. All right, so you'll notice up at the top at Lumetri, you have this Master tab, and then you have this second tab right next to it. The Master tab effectively allows you to apply color changes and LUTs, i.e. lookup tables, which we'll get to in just a second, to your main clip. Now, the main reason for applying things like an input LUT, which you see right there, to the Master tab on your clip is primarily if if this is a longer cut scene and this is something which you're going to be using multiple times in your timeline. This allows you to apply some very basic changes, all right, in this case an input LUT, to populate any instance that you use anywhere in a timeline, anywhere in your edit. All right. Now, if this is a short clip, you're just going to do it once, one time. It's getting used one time only. The default is this instance tab, right? So what this allows you to do, just to kind of make sense of it all, the master allows you to apply some basic corrections that will apply anytime that this is used. But you may have multiple variations of this clip or a different scene from this clip in your timeline, all right? So you can apply different color corrections to those different scenes with the second tab here, all right? Now, when you click on Master, you'll see that I have an input LUT applied. Now, again, this was shot on the Sony A7. A lot of people are very into shooting at log 3, and you can see that we've applied an input LUT, sometimes referred to as a display LUT, right here. Now, when you click on the down arrow, this was one that we actually got from the Sony site. There are some default input LUTs that you can add. And the idea behind this, and by the way, I'm just going to go into our effects controls, because everything that you apply in Lumetri Color, you'll also be able to access in the effects controls tab here. Now again, effects controls, I believe it's already docked and ready in that color workspace. If not, you can always add the effects controls by going to the window menu, all right? So under Master, under the effects controls here, you can see that we have this input LUT applied. Now, again, the idea here is that this input LUT is effectively bringing back all the color it's allowing you to display that color properly on screen so that then you can begin to break it down and do other things with it, okay? Now, if you shoot stuff like on an iPhone, which I'm going to show you some iPhone footage here in a moment, if you're just shooting with a native camera, stuff isn't flat. It's already very contrasty, it's got, contrast and saturation and highlights and sharpness, and that's awesome, right? And the cameras are better than ever before. The thing is, if all of that color and everything is already baked in, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to undo some of that, right? Or modify it, really. If it's super saturated and super contrasty, what happens is if you start to back some of that off when you grade, is that you can tend to incur artifacts, little blocky, pixelated looking things. So now with this particular footage, because it's actually captured raw, again, that input LUT is basically allowing us to display all of that color and give us that wide dynamic range, which we can now begin to manipulate. It's very difficult, if you're not a professional grading artist or really good at color correction, to grade from this state here. You can do it. You can do it without an input LUT. I don't highly recommend it, but again, it's worth trying. And again, if you like sort of experimentation, it's a great way to get you familiarized with kind of the techniques and the tips and how to do all of that. Now, before we move on, because there's another element that you can use to this, which I'm going to get to in just a second, I'm going to switch over here to another timeline. And I believe it's this shot here. Or maybe it's the curve shot. Hold on one second. This shot here? Yes, this curve shot. Okay. So this is some footage that I shot with a Nikon D800. And on this particular shot here, again, I had forgotten to drop the contrast, drop the sharpness, and drop the saturation when I was shooting this. So without that input LUT, it was very, the black was so black, and there was just no shadow detail. So I added an input LUT after the fact. This is another little technique. People aren't doing this as often anymore, but you can do that. If everything has already been kind of super contrasted, super saturated, super sharp, you can add an input LUT to basically reset it back to a zero ground. Now, we used to ship with all of these natively in this input LUT section, but you don't see them anymore. Well, I'm going to show you a little trick here how you can access those input LUTs, those technical LUTs, both in Mac and Windows. So let's start here on the Mac. So on the Mac, if we go to our Applications folder, all right, we're going to go up to Premiere Pro 2020. We're going to right-click on the application, and we're going to choose Show Package Contents. Now, be very careful when you're doing this. Little caveat here, obviously, don't be messing about with stuff in there, but I'm going to show you where you can access these LUTs. They're living there for you. They're waiting. And then you've got a Contents folder. And in the Contents folder, you have a whole series of additional folders. You see one here called Lumetri. Let's go ahead and double-click on Lumetri. And inside Lumetri, you have something called LUTs. And in LUTs, you have a folder called Technical, but the folder that you're looking for is this one here called Legacy. And in Legacy, what you're going to find are input LUTs, not only just stylized ones, but different input LUTs for some of the most popular cameras out there, including things like Blackmagic Cinema Camera, Canon 1D, 5D, 7D, C300, C500, all right, FS5, FS700. Right, you've got some standard log to linear, linear to log to display, all right? Neutral start, like I was talking about. This is a good one to attempt to use if, again, you've got all this color baked in and you're trying to flatten things out to get you started. So you've got a lot of Panasonic, Red. Now, of course, Red has its own Red settings. We won't get into that today, but you have all that capability directly inside of Premiere. And then you have a universal LUT here, which, again, kind of equalizes that color so that you can begin to grade. It just gives you a little bit more latitude, a little bit more room when you're trying to add some of that color back in. We've also got some defaults for S-Log2 and S-Log3, which a lot of you Sony users will be familiar with. So what you can do once you access this folder, a couple of things. If you want all of them to appear in that technical folder, you can, of course, copy them. I don't recommend just moving them. Copy them into the technical folder, or quite simply take that legacy folder and copy it off somewhere else. And then you can import them individually. Now, let me go ahead and switch over to the PC here, and I'll show you the same thing. Basically the same location. You'll see that I'm under my local disk, C drive, program files, not to be confused with x86 program files, the standard program files, Adobe, and then I've got Adobe Premiere Pro 2020. I'm gonna right click on this. Sorry, I've got my touchpad here, and choose Open, all right? And then it's the exact same path as I was telling you. We'll go to Lumetri, all right? Go under LUTs, Legacy, and there they all are, all right? I can't tell you how much of a lifesaver this is, particularly if, you know, like I've got a lot of old footage that I shot on my 7D literally 10 plus years ago and 5D 10 plus years ago. And because I wasn't really good at grading and didn't really understand it at the time, everything had all that color baked in. So everything is just like super contrasty, super saturated, and that's awesome. And some of it looks great, but trying to bring it down into kind of nowadays standards of look is challenging without using something like that input LUT. All right, so that's just something to be aware of, okay? So we've got an input LUT applied on this, which is going to allow us to, again, take it a step further. And I'm going to now just reset all of these controls just by double-clicking on contrast, on the little contrast dial here, and shadows and saturation. Okay, so here's what it looks like just with that input LUT applied. All right, and again, you've also got a bypass for Lumetri up at the top here, this little effects button that you see, so we can bypass it on or off. Okay, very cool. All right, now one other thing that I want you to be aware of, we'll come back to this a little bit later, is that you also have the ability to stack different elements of Lumetri as layers. So you actually have a layer stack here where if you wanted to say, let's say we're going to just apply everything at the clip level, not using the master tab, but we want to do sort of multiple looks. You can have different layers of Lumetri that contain, let's say, a color look or a cinematic look. And then you can add another layer. In this case, it says add Lumetri color effect. And that can be a monochrome or a black and white look. Or maybe you have one layer which is just that flat version, and then another layer which is the colorized version, and another layer which is the black and white version. You get the idea. You can use layers. It's all non-destructive anyway. It just depends on how you like to organize and leverage all of these different modules. When I'm doing sort of different creative color styles, I love to use layers. Generally, if I'm just applying something and getting a look, it's just kind of a quick application and I don't really mess about with it all that much, all right? So again, we've got our LUT applied on the master. Now we're in the instance tab, all right? And this is where we can begin to do all those things that you already know from Lightroom and from Camera Raw. Again, we can adjust temperature, right? So we can cool it off, we can warm it up real simply. And by the way, these aren't just ported over from Camera Raw. These were redesigned, reimagined for video, right? They actually took algorithms from the various different camera manufacturers and integrated those so that exposure really functions like exposure, not just gain up or down, all right? And then again, we can get into things like contrast, okay? So we can drop the contrast here or increase the contrast. All right, I think I'm going to drop it a little bit because we're going to make up some of that by going into shadows here. Let's lift some of those shadows, give us a little more shadow detail. And then let's increase our saturation ever so slightly, all right? And with 3 simple clicks here, 3 simple manipulations. Before, right, super dark. Looks good, but just kind of dark, right? Not a lot of detail, looks like one leg there. After, well, now we can see some definition. Or again, the pink is popping, the sky has a lot of sort of beautiful gradient hues. It's just like Lightroom. All right. You can have so much fun with this. And of course, in another section, we'll talk about how you can keyframe these manipulations, because don't forget that we're also talking about, leveraging this over time, right? As people move in the scene, the light may change and you may have to make adjustments to contrast, to highlights, right? Maybe we want to pump the highlights up in this section here, blow out a little bit of that sky, or again, we can drop them down to give it a little bit more subtle drama, which brings a little bit more focus to the sun on her face there. So really simple, easy change, minute changes can make a real dramatic difference. All right. Just checking over to the chat here. All right. Hey, TR, what's happening? Massimiliano, all right. No questions so far. And thank you, Paco, for handling those. Nima from Iran, hello. Desiree, hey, hey. All right, awesome. Anthony, we'll see you next time. Of course, you'll have the replay available to you. Now, something to keep in mind here. We're going to move on from this in just a second. One of the great things about this is, again, you might have a whole series of clips that were shot at the same time with the same camera and the same location. So you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time. So if you right-click, control-click on a clip, you can copy the attributes that you've applied to that clip. And when you go to a second clip, like this one here of our main character, the surfer, I can right-click and I can choose paste. So here, let me go and just do it so you can see what it actually does. I'm going to copy the attributes, come over here, and choose paste attributes. I've already done that, actually. And then you can tell it exactly what you want it to paste. And in this case, we're going to have the Lumetri color changes and effects that I applied to that clip. So when I go to this next clip, you'll see that it has the same exact look as the previous one, right? But this is what I was talking about. Look at how the sun here is that much more vibrant, right? So maybe in this case, actually, I think it's because I made a slight modification in saturation. Yeah, so this one's about 184. Let's pump it up a little bit more like that. So as we transition between these two, it just looks a little bit more, seamless. And again, you look at the grass, you look at the sky, and you really try and get that seamless kind of tonality there. Maybe we even pull back a little bit of the saturation here. I might even lower the contrast just a bit more. These are the kinds of things that you might do with keyframes over time. Remember, camera's moving, different angles of the sun hitting our lens here. But copy-paste attributes is a great way to share your color across multiple clips, all right? Super important, super useful. Now, just to kind of showcase, this is Sony footage. Not everybody's working with a Sony camera. What about iPhone, right? iPhone 4K. Get asked this all the time. Can you really shoot? And everybody kind of knows this now. I mean, the commercials will tell you, shot on iPhone. Frankly, if I have to hear shot on iPhone one more time, I mean, we get it, all right? And really, that's the thing, right? Where is it going? How is it being consumed? It just needs to be in focus. That's really mainly what you got to get right when you're shooting, right? Get it in focus. The color, the style, everything else can be done after the fact. And it can be done using techniques and tools that you already know. So here's a little shot that I did in Alaska a couple months ago. All right, beautiful sunset happening there, shot on an iPhone 10, all right, on a mountain. You'll notice not a lot of snow happening here. Yes, yes, indeed, climate change is real. But this is modified, all right? Now, one of the things that I'll tell you is here, again, I didn't use any kind of input LUT, but this is the before. So this is the raw capture. Now, it looks pretty good. There's actually some fairly decent shadow detail. Again, you're getting some of those nice natural lens flares. I mean, this isn't After Effects. That's the actual sun as I'm shooting into the sun, reflecting off the camera lens there. It's okay, but again, the blue sky, not quite as vibrant as I'd like. The hot sun, maybe a little too hot. And I really wanted to bring out a bit more of the red and the warmth in those sun flares. And that was all done with, as you can see here, a couple of very simple modifications. Drop the exposure by about half a stop, lowered the contrast to bring back some of the shadow detail, drop the highlights, right, to kind of take some of the edge off of that bright sun, increased our black level here, and then added just a bit of saturation, all right? And if you've looked at, you may have noticed that we added a whole new series of interactive tutorials in Lightroom, and Lightroom CC specifically. What's really cool about this is that, you know, you'll see, again, as you make these modifications, you'll see how it's affecting the shot very, very quickly. And as I mentioned, this is really why, like, exposure in particular is so good in Premiere, because this is really simulating camera exposure, not just gain. So it's really giving you that natural feel of what that's supposed to look like. Again, if I were to leave the contrast normal, you can see it looks almost like a mountain silhouette. As we drop that contrast, now you're starting to see more of the mountain detail. Similarly with the highlights, right? You can see that sun when the highlights were normal. It's kind of edgy, a little too much, right? I didn't shoot it flat in the iPhone. Now, by the way, if you shoot with apps like Filmic Pro or even in Rush, you have more control over your camera settings. This was just done in the standard camera app. All right, drop our highlights there. Again, I didn't want to crush the black. I wanted to lift the black a little bit more, all right? So this slider here in particular is so good for video. Added a little bit of saturation. And then the last thing, which I'm not going to get into today, but it's pretty obvious, I just added a little bit of a vignette here just to make it ever so slightly more cinematic. So this is the same vignette, exact same vignette with the same midpoint roundness and feathering controls that you have in Lightroom and Camera Raw. Again, just give it a little bit of drama, a little bit more cinematic flavor here. All right, I'm going to drop this to half res, and it just looks wonderful. The other thing about Premiere to know, by the way, is with this global effects bypass, I can turn it on or off as I'm playing back. So it gives me some nice real-time feedback as I'm going forward. And again, look at the original now. Now it looks so blown out, right? Like, oh, not a particularly great shot. Post-color, like, oh, it looks very cinematic and dramatic and, you know, nice, right? And that's all you want, you know? You just want to give it that warm feeling. I want to remember what it felt like. That's the color that I remember. This is what the phone captured. Pretty good. That's not how I remember seeing it. This is how I remembered seeing it. All right? Cool. All right. All right, let's see. Okay, so I'm looking at the questions here. Norman, is it possible that I would put adjustment layer and put as a color correction before grading it? Absolutely. So you can use adjustment layers too. Now here's the thing. You still have a reason to use adjustment layers, particularly when you're doing an overall grade on everything. So after I individually grade single clips, and we'll cover adjustment layers in another episode, but it works the same concept as in After Effects or in Photoshop. And I'll even just do it for you real quickly right here. So up at the File menu, I can say, oh, here, 1 second. I'll even do it. Let me move this, make it easier so you can see this. So this is our project panel here. All right, this is where all of your footage is contained. And at the bottom of the project panel, you have the new item button. All right. So on your new item button, you'll see that you have the ability here to add an adjustment layer. As mentioned, I see it was just kind of covered by my camera right there. All right, it'll give you your adjustment layer in the proper frame size and aspect ratio. You drop it down into your timeline. And then on that adjustment layer now, if I select it so that it's in focus, again, and I'm in Lumetri Color, now any change that I make to that affects everything underneath it. So again, if I wind over to our guy over here, right, this color control is affecting him as well. So this is a really common technique after you individually grade and or correct each shot, right? Then to kind of give everything your overall look, you use an adjustment layer. That is the most commonplace way to do it, all right? Now again, you can still have multiple layers on that adjustment layer. So this is where, when you're doing your final delivery, maybe you'll have a classic look or an edgy look or a, I always remember things by movie style. So like the Minority Report, super cool, end of days, kind of bluish overall hue. I might add something like that. And then I'll come up to our layers here and I'll add another one. So maybe we rename this and we call this warm or quorm. All right, now I'm going to make a new one. And let's rename this and we'll call this blue cool. All right. Now I don't want to add both of these. So I'm going to disable the warm, right? Individually disable that layer, come back over to blue cool. And now I can cool everything off and I can push up the highlights and I can drop the shadows here and crush the black level a little bit. And now we've got this kind of cooler toned delivery, right? Go into our sun here. Again, just a little bit cooler. Now I can disable this and go, oh, what did the warm one look like? Let's disable cool, go back to warm, turn that on. It's warmer, right? All on the adjustment layer. Doesn't change all the stuff we already did on the individual clips, right? Super great question. All right, thanks, Norman. All right. Stephen Tabor, when will you be able to fix focus in post? Got to be coming someday. Save my family videos. So Stephen, actually, you do have a function in After Effects, and if you go to the Premiere or After Effects Facebook page, maybe even the Creative Cloud Facebook page, or my own YouTube channel, which is Jason Levine Video, we have a function in After Effects called Camera Shake De-Blur. And Camera Shake De-Blur does just that. It attempts to sharpen or repair blurred frames. Now, that's not to say out of focus necessarily. It's more to do with motion blur, but it's a step in that direction. If you're trying to actually correct, your focus wheel was just a couple millimeters off, perhaps that tech is coming, but it's not in there quite yet. But that's great. We love that. All right. Jan Eric, sharpness is a bourgeois concept. Yeah, right. All right. And Steven, so yes, just everybody always loves machine specs. So this is a 2017 fully loaded iMac 5K, 64 gigs of RAM. It's got the Radeon 8 gig card internally and with 2 terabyte SSD and a very massive 12 or 16 terabyte RAID, which I can't remember. And the PC system is one of the new 10th generation Intel Dells, which is really phenomenal as well. Okay. All right, Curtis, if you have a long shot, do you often grade a raw clip in its entirety before cutting it into the edit, or cut the edit and then grade the individual parts? So Curtis, this is exactly what I was mentioning before. So if it's like if you were to shoot it and, again, you shot it S-Log3, if that's going to be cut up into multiple sections, because yes, you're going to use a bit of it at the beginning and some of it in the middle, I would add the input LUT to the master so that that's automatically applied in any instance that I use. Now, depending upon where else it appears in the scene, you may want to give that individual instance a completely different look. So this is where, again, you have the input LUT on the master tab here, but on the cut of it, that particular instance, you can add an entirely different look, an entirely different grade to that instance of the clip somewhere else in your timeline. Absolutely. Yeah, Steven, give it a try. I mean, it's one of those features, camera shake deblur. It will amaze you. It's not going to do it all the time. Sometimes even with an actual handshake, it doesn't quite do it, or, just physical shaking of the camera. But other times it will, and it'll blow your mind. So it's worth trying out. And if there are frames that are in focus, like if you were messing about and you just were so close but not quite there, it has some pretty cool intelligence in there that tries to analyze the sharp frame and make the non-sharp frames sharper. So if nothing else, it might just get you there a little bit faster, okay? All right, so that is the basic correction panel. Now we're gonna move on to the creative tab, all right? Now, much like its name implies, after you've done your basic corrections, this is where you can now add a little bit of style. Not that you can't be stylistic with the basic corrections, but this is specifically where, you can use creative display type LUTs, all right? And you can find lots of these all over the internet. Okay. So, sorry, I'm just reading comments as we're going. Okay, so again, this particular module, really, really easy to understand, right? So right up at the top is where you have your looks. These are LUTs, and they come in various flavors, right? .cube, .3D, .3D. Some of these you'll find pre-installed. We've probably got about, 3 or 4 dozen plus in here. All the ones that say SL, these were speed looks that we licensed. These used to be in our application speed grade. So you've got lots of different ones in there. You've also got some of my favorite ones, which some of our regulars in the chat here, Jan, Eric, and Tim know I'm a huge fan of. These are film stock emulations. So if you're trying to give your video, your digital video, a more classic film-like look, you'll be able to apply these. I'm going to show you these right now. And just so you understand the naming, the nomenclature here. So when it says Fuji 250D Kodak 2395, that means, shot on Fuji, printed on Kodak. That's kind of what that's referencing. Kodak 5228, 5218, shot on Kodak 5218, printed on Kodak 2383. All right. And if you know film, you'll be like, oh yeah, totally. But that's what that means. So how do we take a look at these? Well, the best way to do it, of course, first and foremost, your cursor, and I believe it's by default, your selection, under the sequence menu, there's an option here, selection follows playhead. If that's not enabled for some particular reason, you can enable that under the sequence menu. One thing that I will let you know is that, especially when you have lots of clips and stacked things in your timeline, be sure that when you're applying your grade, that you're doing it on the clip you want. And you'll know that it's that clip because you'll get your white outline showing you that that's the clip that's in focus. It's real easy to accidentally start doing stuff and go, why is nothing happening? Oh, because this clip isn't in focus, all right? So make sure that your clip is in focus, all right? What's that, Jan Eric? You had one of those toy Casio keyboards. I correct you, my friend, dear sir. It was having the marketing back then was having a whole band in your hand. Believe it or not, this was actually released as a professional monophonic handheld synthesizer, if you can believe that. Yes, a toy for all intents and purposes, but marketed as a professional music creation tool. For adults, no less, which is kind of funny. I still have it. It still works. This is my original one. Love that. Okay, so how do we apply these? Well, again, you can go down and just start selecting them manually here, or you'll see inside of the creative view here, you have these arrows. So as you start clicking through, it's going to show you the preview of what it would look like, and then you can simply click inside to apply. So if we take a look, so here's the Fuji 250D 3510. I don't like that one. It's got kind of a magenta hue. This one, 250D Kodak. Now, I love this 250D 2395. This one really gives it a very film-like look very quickly. And what I was doing here, if you take a look at the footage, I was doing a bit of a rack focus. So, right now, you see it starts focused on Casio VL tone over here. And then I'm adjusting the focus wheel, down all the way down to the end of the keyboard, where now it's focusing on, this section here. So again, you can start to click through these and get just different looks, right? And you'll see that this particular one, I love this. This was shot on a wood table. If you disable this, all right, again, here's the before, here's the after, but take a look. You can actually see, you know, wood grain tables tend to have little pores, little holes. You can really very clearly see those pores in the table. It's just super, super cool. Again, some of these are going to have a cooler element to them, but all of these are really easy to use. Now we're getting into some monochromatic film stocks, all right? And you can just click through these until you see something that you really, really like. Again, if you're going totally stylistic, this one's called Blue Steel. We used to laugh about this one all time and deliver the Ben Stiller, you know, as we're applying it. The key to using these, and I think one of the best things that they implemented, was that you have an intensity slider. So it always applies by default at 100% intensity. You can back that off. So basically, this is like your mix balance, right? You can increase the intensity, right? That's way too much. Well, maybe not. Depends on what you're doing, right? But you have this intensity slider. So, you know, a lot of times, particularly with, it's interesting because the default, the first LUT that you'll see in the list here, this CineSpace one, it's very cinematic. And if you shoot with super flat footage, this one applies quite nicely at its default values. Shoot it on anything that has high contrast, and you can see it's like there's just no shadow detail whatsoever. Highlights are okay. They're not blown out. They're controlled, but it's very, very intense. So this is where I'll tend to, you know, back it off, and you can just see how it starts to bring back some of the detail in the wood there. All right, and give you just some sense of detail, because otherwise it's just a bit too crushed. So that particular slider right there, that's your friend. All right, let's go to one of my film stock favorites right here. Okay, and then after that, you've just got a couple of basic adjustments here that make sense, right? So the first one, faded film. If you want to give things a bit more of that film-like look, and you're going to see this a bit more easily on the second clip here, that's what that does. Sharpen, vibrance, and saturation. So let's move over to that one actually. All right, so here's another clip of mine shot on my Moog Rogue analog synthesizer from way back in the day. All right, so this one again, you can see it's fairly flat looking, nondescript. Right when we look at CineSpace, this is what I'm talking about. See, even flat, it's so dark. You know, that's just not going to work, right? Maybe with lower intensity, but then we're not really getting the flavor of that LUT, right? That one looks pretty cool. I love 250D, 3510. I definitely want to go for a cool blue sort of hue. 5205, 3510. Ooh, I think that's it, right? Before, after, right? Now, remember, this is also where we can come in here now and add a little bit of that faded film to give us a little bit more of that lower contrast, classic kind of detail, and we can increase the intensity here. And let's say I wanted more of that blue hue. Well, that's where we can now go into the shadow tint and highlight tint wheels. I want to pull some of those shadows into some cooler tones. I can simply grab this and just start dragging towards the blue, right? And now I'm making those shadows a little cooler, a little bluer, a little more dramatic. Similarly, maybe we'll leave the highlights alone. Kind of like where those are at. We can warm up the highlights if we want. And then you've got a tint balance adjustment here as well. By the way, you can always click inside the hot text and just reset it like that. Last three settings under this one here, sharpen, right? And this, of course, any photographer, videographer will tell you, I almost never use this. It's a pretty decent sharpen algorithm, but use sparingly. Be careful, right? Now, remember, as I said before, when you are actively, de-sharpening, de-contrasting, desaturating video footage, yes, you typically want to add a little bit of that sharpness back in, but a very little goes a long way. And you'll see, if you just take a look here, I mean, this is in focus, it's sharp. If I start to go up to like, let's say 50%, I mean, it's okay, but now it's starting to get that digital crispiness, even though we have, a faded film effect applied. So, and of course you can de-sharpen to just blur everything, which can also be kind of a nice effect too. And you can even keyframe that. It gives it a bit more of a, it's not quite a film blur look though. So, just be mindful of sharpen. Again, if you shoot photography, you know this already. Vibrance, again, it's going to look at the most present colors, not all of the colors, right? And just accentuate those primary colors in the image. So it's going to bring out some of that orange warmth in the wheel, a little bit of that red. That was some paint. This was a classic Moog. I bought it off of eBay 20 some years ago, 25 years ago, 20, 21 years, 22 years ago. And again, it's going to bring out some of the bluer hues, the more present hues of that blue. And then you have an additional saturation adjustment down here. All right, again, use this one very, very sparingly. Okay. Now remember, you can always still go back to the basic corrections and make additional adjustments there. So even though this follows your order of operations, basic correction first, then creative. Let's say, I kind of want to, I want to, make those shadows a little more dramatic here. You can do that after the fact. And maybe you want to pump up some of those highlights to really make the white pop. You can do that too, right? And you can also enable or disable individual modules right here. So if you want to see what this looks like before we got creative, there it is. There was our original, kind of flat, although now, of course, we just made some basic corrections, right? All right, so there technically is the original with nothing on. There's the basic correction, and there's our creative version, right? Really nice. Looks super cool. You can see, again, a little bit of a rack focus right there on the Rogue logo, okay? Now, again, could we have done this with layers? Absolutely. No rule on how you have to do it. It's entirely how you feel comfortable doing it. All right? Super cool. What's up, Paul Tranny? Yes, first masterclass. So happy to be doing these here on Behance and Adobe Live up on our Adobe Creative Cloud YouTube channel. Again, thank you all for joining. All right. All right. Let's see if we've got any other particular questions here that haven't already been answered. All right. Okay, Massimiliano. Okay, no one's answered you. Yeah, so the question is, do you apply the Fuji look before or after the basic color correction? So, as I said, typically you would apply that after, right? So you kind of do the basic correction to even things out or get it about where you want it to be so that it looks good, but true to its name, the creative tab is where you just add a bit of style. And again, if we wanted to, we could leave the basics on their own layer, create a new layer right here, right? Add Lumetri color effect, and then we can start messing about with the different creative looks. It's really entirely up to you. You don't have to do it that way. It just makes sense. All right. Steven, looks cool, but I miss the rich brown of the table. I'm inspired to go polish some tables right now. Exactly, right? I mean, you could use it any way that you like, however you want to be, get your style on and give it your own particular kind of look, all right? Love rack focus. All right, Eric, thank you. Christian, hello. All right, very sweet. Okay, super cool. So that's the creative tab, right? Simple, easy, intuitive, nothing to it. If you're doing it already in Lightroom and Photoshop Camera Raw, this feels so familiar. This is one more extension. I see someone here, it's like Premiere Visco, right? Yeah, kinda. I will say that in Adobe's canon, we're not super well known for our presets. There's lots of them in here. And you can get very, very creative with these creative looks and then take them a step further because they can all be modified after the fact, right? Using the various controls that we have in here, not the LUTs themselves. By the way, it's worth pointing out since I'm in here, let's say you create a particular look using all these various modules or using just the basic corrections and it's something that you want to share, you can save presets not only of everything in Lumetri, but also of specific looks by clicking on the flyout menu at the top of the Lumetri Color Panel up here. All right. You can export a .look, a .cube, which is a standard LUT file format that you can open in everything from Premiere to Resolve. Basically, any pro app that reads LUTs will open up .cube files. And Save's preset is specific to Premiere Pro. It'll take anything that you've done in any or all of these modules in Premiere and create a preset, which will appear in your Effects menu. Pull this up over here under Presets. So if you take a look here, you can see I've got, these are some standard ones under Lumetri presets. there's various ones in here that we give you, right, that you have access to. So it'll show up in this preset menu. All right. Cool. Okay. Any more questions at the moment? No. All right, moving on. Last part. Part 3. Curves. Okay. So this in particular is really cool because this is something which, until we released this feature, and it's called selective color grading, this is something that I never thought that I could possibly have done. And it's the ability to use specific hue saturation curves to target very specific colors in your image. Now, if you heard hue saturation, you might think, oh, well, is that similar to hue saturation luminance, often used in secondary color correction? Again, we'll tackle this in the next episode. We have that as a separate module down here, HSL secondaries. We're not going to get into that today. But effectively, when you go into the curves section, first of all, right at the top, you're going to see that we have RGB curves, right? Looks familiar, right? Same RGB curves that you have now. I think we've unified this UI in basically every Adobe app, from Photoshop to Illustrator to Premiere, etc. So again, you have your master and then your RGB channels, right? So if we wanted to do like some basic kind of contrast, the standard S curve is something that you see a lot. Oh, and by the way, look what I was just talking about. It's not doing anything because even though I'm on this clip, I have this one selected here, right? Exactly what I was just saying minutes ago. Make sure the clip you're working on is selected. So again, if I wanted to do some, the basic S curve that you often see on a master control like this, really again, kind of crush that contrast a bit, you can do all of that here. I'm not going to go into curves because this is the standard one. We have this in every Adobe app and it functions exactly the same way. It's the selective color grading curves under hue saturation, also part of curves, that we're going to focus on. And the first one is something called hue versus sat, all right? Quite simply, what hue versus sat does is it allows you to adjust the saturation of a particular hue that you select with the standard Adobe eyedropper, okay? So let's say in this particular shot, and again, we've already got, I believe this has got an input LUT applied as well. Come up here, let me see. It does, okay, so this was shot on Alexa, so you can see on the master, we've got an Alexa input LUT applied here. Let's go back to our instance, back to curves, all right? Let's go ahead and choose our eyedropper. I want to warm up the skin tones, but just the skin tones. I don't want to touch, his lips. I don't want to touch his sweater. I don't want to touch the ground, just the skin tones. I'm going to click on my eyedropper. I'm going to come over to his face right here and find kind of a sort of neutral, because obviously your skin tone changes, right, over the course of your face, over the curves of your face. So find something that's kind of generally representative, click it, and when you do that, inside your hue saturation curve, you'll now see you get 3 control points. Now, this is the standard view that you get in most color grading apps. And this is what has always made it really scary to me because yes, the reds and those orange skin tones, they're on the edge. So if you start making adjustments, like that always confused me. Why do I have to work on the edge? I don't get it. I'm not a colorist, so I know there's a reason for that, but it just scared me and I didn't do it. And I never tried to investigate how to do it. And I just said, forget it. I'm never going to be good at that. Well, first and foremost, we added this lovely little slider right in here. So this allows you to put whatever color you select front and center. And then you'll see by default, it gives you 3 control points. All right, I'm just going to move up a little so we can focus in on his skin like this. All right. If you hold down the Shift key, this will constrain that center point, meaning that you won't be able to move left or right. So we're only affecting that selected hue. And when I click on that center point, now it's giving you a visual indicator of exactly what's going to happen. As I go above the line, you can see visually, right? It's saturating the skin tone. You see he's getting a bit more orangey. He's been to the tanning bed, right? And visually you can see as we go below the line, we're now desaturating, right? Right? Needs a little bit of iron deficiency going on there right now, okay? So visually, it shows you exactly what is happening. What? Can it be that easy? Yes. If you want to increase the range of color, You can drag the points left or right, up or down, however you feel you need to do. Now, by the way, if I don't grab that center point with shifts selected, you see now it's not constrained. So I can move, left or right of those selections and maybe find the exact hue. Sometimes you wind up affecting other adjacent colors. So this is kind of a cool technique as well. It won't let you go beyond those anchor points at the left and right. Okay? So really cool, really useful. And again, before, a little bit washed out. After, just a nice boost in the skin tone, right? Now, similarly, what if we want to do it for the sky? Well, I don't need to add another version of this. I can take the eyedropper. I can make a selection in the blue sky. Note that it creates our control points right there. And since I'm just here, I'm going to leave it there. I could drag it into the center, right? Hold down my shift and increase. And look at that. The sky is getting bluer. How about it was a cloudy day? We don't want any blue. We can take just the blue out without affecting the overall shot. Or we can bring it in, right? Super cool, super easy to use, all right? Absolutely love this feature. Again, before now, subtle, right? It's not, it is like massively dramatic change here. After, oh, it comes to life, right? There's the after. Before, still lovely, but just a bit flat. After, nice. All right, lovely shot there. Super cool. I believe this was done in Iceland, all right? So that's hue versus sat. You're adjusting the saturation of a particular hue, all right? Let's see if we've got any questions on that. All right. Okay. Jan Eric, I believe it is Iceland. Yeah, you're right on the money there. Gianfranco, yeah, and the thing is, if you want to do the round trip to resolve, look, I'm the first to say, do it however you're comfortable. The key is you can create looks and LUTs here and use them in Resolve, but all these apps, we play nicely with each other. Do your cut here, do your grade there, whatever you feel comfortable doing. I'm the first to say that. People have to feel comfortable and inspired when they're doing it. Maybe this will inspire you to try more of this in Premiere. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, Steven, now some of the things you're talking about there, sampling highlights, midtones, and shadows on skin tone, this is when you're doing those this is what you use HSL for. And again, when we get into that in another future episode of this masterclass, that's actually where you do all of that. And if you I'll just show real briefly here. I don't want to divert too much, but you'll see when you do your color setting, this is where you can take multiple samples. You can erase sampled collections that you took, and you just have a lot more control over those elements. But yeah, you're probably going to see over time even more sensei-based implementation of these kinds of things. So yeah, you're definitely thinking along the lines. Okay. All right, so let's move on here. I've got two more quick examples, and then I'm going to send you all on your way. So that's, again, hue versus sat. Let's move on to the next one here, real briefly, which is hue versus hue. Now, this one, again, this was one of those that just, it eluded me for a very long time. And we're just gonna get a little creative and silly with this one. But this one it allows you to adjust the hue of an existing hue, okay? So in this example, let's say our actress here, we wanted her to be, it's a lovely shot, but we wanted her to look like, I don't know, a bit more edgy, a bit more punk. We wanted to give her green lipstick instead of kind of this lush red magenta that she has. So I want to adjust the hue of that red to something like green. That's what hue versus hue is for. You're going to adjust the existing hue to something else. So again, I'll take the eyedropper and, I want to find something that's fairly representative, make my selection. And again, because it's in those reds, I'm going to slide this control into view just like that, okay? Now I'm going to get this into place here so you can see. Now I'm going to hold down my shift key to constrain the values, because when I click on it now, this is what's so cool about this user. I mean, again, this is like UI UX magic. They really nailed it with this one. And I'll tell you, as someone who wasn't intimately aware about the importance of UI UX, like many of us until recently, this is so well done because now it's showing you, okay, if I go up, I'm going red, magenta, purple, blue, etc. But if I go below the line, now I'm getting into the oranges, yellows, greens, blah, blah, blah. All right. And there perhaps is the green we want. But we have a problem because some of the red in her cheeks naturally is picking up that same hue. So this is where, as I was saying earlier, you can simply adjust the position of, say, that left anchor. Let's bring it in a little more to minimize, I would say in audio, the bandwidth of our color selection here. So watch her cheeks. As I start to bring this in towards the right, you can see that that green starts to go away. Again, we can bring out more of it here, a little bit less. As we swing the bell around, that way, just like that, now we got it out of her cheek, okay? And if we zoom out again, let's go actually full 100% here. So before, after. And we could probably refine that even better. Not the best example for this, but it just colorizes it so nicely. And it's a good way to illustrate what's possible, all right? I did another quick example here. Here we're back to our Casio. Let's do this at like 75%. So let's say we wanted to, again, recolorize that button. Now, if I just wanted to make it more vibrant, more red, that's where I would use hue versus sat. I want to turn this into a color that it wasn't. Make my selection, drag, oh, sorry, not hue versus luma, hue versus hue. Come over here, drag this in like this, up or down, and now we can go into something like blue. All right, fit it, and we're good to go. All right, so that's hue versus hue, hue versus sat, RGB curves, creative, and basic corrections. Thank you so much for joining. We've got Howard coming up next, so stick around for that, and I'll see you back here on Behance next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.